computer. I'm recording on this computer. All right, wonderful. Welcome, Mighty Peace Teachers Convention participants to our session. As you may have read, the intro, the title of this is a performance mindset and being able to nest performance thinking into high performance athletes. Now, obviously the high performance athletes, we'll get into that a little bit, and hopefully some of the stories that we share throughout the session will help you sort of provide some context to that. We're looking at this big picture, competitive school season, which would be the season part, and sometimes it's shorter, obviously when it comes to schools, but your contact is much longer. Okay? Your contact is in that 9-month range. And a lot can be done in that 9-month range. So we want to be able to capitalize on that contact. Okay. We want to take it from a place of education to acquisition, and then being able to practice some of those skills even daily, instead of it just being something that might be tied to a team mantra or the performance side of team, or something that we grind or determine to be able to get. We want to be able to develop a plan that actually strengthens athletes' confidence year round. And that can be for any of the psychological constructs that you hear thrown around sport or generally, but we're going to talk about a few today. And my name is Matthew Bain. I am a mental performance consultant, registered psychologist. I have been doing this for a really long period of time, and I love the challenges that are constantly being thrown at me, and be able to sit down, talk with other experts in other fields, get different thinking going, and be able to sort of shuttle things back out the door in the interest of being very practical. And I'm so excited today to be joined. I will let him introduce himself, but his name is Dave Wachnick. Dave, go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So my name is Dave Wachnick. I'm currently the head coach at the University of Lethbridge women's basketball program. I've been here for the last 6 years. Previous to that, I was in Grand Prairie at the GPRC College for 10 seasons as the women's basketball coach there, originally from the Peace Country, from the Spirit River area. So just really excited to be a part of this. I've worked with Matt for a long time. Don't want to date us and make us sound old, but we've worked together for a long time. And I think these are topics that I've coached now post-secondary women for 16 years that I'm still tweaking and working through. And I think there's some great stuff that we will be able to kind of get into today. And I'm sure I'm going to be able to learn something and take something out of today too. So looking forward to it.
And that echo that sentiment to Dave 100% is each and every time that Dave and I have sat down together, I learn and I help to construct and appreciate what comes from the challenges of not just the sport part, but coaching as a broader picture, and being able to embrace the idea of an identity of a coach. And we're going to talk about some of those concepts today. And I think this is where you're really, really fortunate as a participant today to have Dave's echoing voice in our ears. As Dave said it, if you're familiar with football in any way, the NFL, he decided to call himself the Troy Aikman, and I am Joe Buck. And so hopefully that doesn't offend anybody, because Joe Buck's voice is sort of like this, and it's a bit difficult to hear for long periods of time. So I'm not going to talk like that today. But we're going to go through a couple of things. I'm going to mention a few just so you can write them down as we go, so you kind of know when we're transitioning. So the first point that Dave and I are going to talk about is where coaches typically end up starting. Okay? And we'll move into what happens sort of when the well-intentioned concepts go astray. We want to be able to know how those constructs become live. And by constructs, we're talking about things like determination, commitment, perseverance, persistence, resilience, relentlessness, discipline, all of these things that are really intangible and are great words, terms, and phrases to throw around. But when those things like, I want to be disciplined, but it isn't as clear what discipline looks like, then that's what we're talking about when things tend to go astray. We want to be able to talk very practically today about how to make those things become live. We want to talk about sport constructs, okay? Discipline is not unique to only sport, right? But we do have a captive audience that is interested in understanding discipline through sport rather than discipline through self. And so it's wanting to really look at that and kind of take a deeper dive into it as well. How do we bridge psychological constructs within sport constructs? We're going to talk about goal setting principles, the most utilized but least effectively utilized mental skill, right? And so we want to get into that a little bit. And I think you're going to hear Dave's. I might just sidestep the whole session and let Dave take over in that sense, because we're talking about a master at being able to goal set for teams and athletes. And when you get to hear his experience around goal setting, it is impressive to see how important and pertinent and how deep it is on his teams, if I'm allowed to say that today, Dave. And then we're going to establish some of those principles for your current daily behavioral expectations, as well as some of those contacts. So, how do I have that face to face contact and bring up something that seems to be a bit ambiguous, but really isn't, right? And then connections, connections, connections. We're going to connect the dots. And that's what we want to be able to wrap our entire session up with, being able to connect the dots. So, hopefully that we've sort of got you a little bit captivated. We put the objectives out there. We've introduced ourselves, but really the most important thing we want to impart on our session today is knowledge, right? Information. How do I be able to do this? How can I do this better, right? We want people to be better humans. Okay, that's not to say that they're bad to begin with, but we're all always working. That's why you see popular videos on YouTube today. What is your why has 50 gazillion hits. People are searching and seeking for these kinds of things, but also the interpretation of them still comes from the person. It's got to be filtered through personal experience, and important people in their lives, such as coaches, play a massive role in fostering the importance of that. So I'm going to actually pass it right off to Dave and say, Dave, where do coaches typically start when it comes to these processes?
Yeah, I think the where I've started when I started this whole process was I always looked outward instead of inward. And I think if I'm going to give you anything to write down, hopefully I give you something today, but I'll give you this is that I think for this to work and for this to come off a whiteboard and come off of paper and into your application of your coaching and your teaching and your culture, it has to come through you, the person. And I think when I started off coaching, I wanted to sort of look outward and say, okay, here's a list of sports psychology terms and here's a list of things I'm supposed to do. So I'll check each box. Yeah, it's there. But it was never really in my voice. And it wasn't until I started to realize that these have to align with me. Anything that I do, my language, my behavior, my expectations, they have to be true to me. That's when it started to be effective because it was real and it was easy for me to plan. It became a lot simpler of a process because I know who I am. So now I know where I want to go with it. And when it comes from you, then it becomes genuine. That's where relationships build. That's where trust builds. And I think that's what's the most important part of this. It can't just be sort of a checklist of I have to be this certain way. It has to be authentic.
Hmm. I love the way that you framed that. Is like, we want to go in and like Dave and I have talked at length, and both of us have been there. I've been there as a coach. I feel like I can't speak exactly for Dave, but there was always sort of like, do I go in heavy? Do I go in as the authority? Should I be there as the strong? Do I have to be the all-knowing person? Like, Dave, you're nodding. Like, tell me a little, like.
Yeah. So when again we'll reference football, but if you ever watched 1970s football coaches, so the Tom Landrys and all those guys, Vince Lombardi's, and they have the trench coats and the hats, and they look mean and tough and rough. That's what I used to think coaching was. Like when I would close my eyes, that was what coaching was. It was that guy, that kind of shadowy figure that would float in the background, that would it's my way or the highway, and it was very disciplined this one way. But that I tried that for a while and it just wasn't me. And I just couldn't kind of connect the dots because I thought, well, I have to go this way, but what about this? What about that? What's important to me? And for me, it was relationships. Well, how can I build a relationship when I'm focusing on just on sort of discipline or establishing dominance, I guess, in the setting. So when it became more of myself, it's not to say that some of these things still didn't happen. They just happened in my own handwriting, my own language, my own voice, basically.
Hmm. And what Dave's describing is what what we use in psychological or in sports psych is in a coach development model. It starts first with the first three boxes are about that coach's like personal characteristics. Like I can't dismiss this and then try to do that Tom Landry thing. I mean, there's a great video of Homer Simpson buying the Landry hat on, and feeling like a leader all of a sudden because he's wearing this cool hat. Like, we can't dismiss those really valuable characteristics. And I've always said this to teachers, like, if we go out and coach a different way than you'll teach, like, you don't have a whole lot of kids in the classroom doing push-ups because they spoke out of turn, or you don't have them running hallway, burpees and lines, because they're not respecting somebody beside them in the class. Yet all of a sudden, we take a behavior or behavioral principle of consequence out onto the pitch, the field, or whatever, and we're executing something that we may actually not fundamentally believe in. And so that's that other part, that sociological, that sports sociological context, that, well, I think this is what I'm supposed to do, without really ever thinking it through. Because there's that inner conflict that often occurs for coaches, because they're not that way, but then I feel like I've got to be that way for some mystery box reason, right?
Yeah, when I started coaching, I worked with high age boys, and we had a rule on our team was when you took a shot that was an air ball, you had to do 10 push-ups. And why we had that rule, I have no idea, but we had that rule. So think about it. If you have a kid who's learning to play basketball, they're going to miss, and a lot of them are going to be air balls. So we were doing a lot of push-ups. So basketball practice became push-up practice. Well, what happens to someone's arms when you're doing 10, 50, 100 push-ups? You're going to be airballing more and more. So none of this made sense, but I did it because a previous coach of mine did it. So we did it the same way. Well, what it did was, when I looked at it, okay, one, we're setting them up to fail, but two, we're putting fear in them because now they're scared to shoot from, try anything new. They won't even extend their range because, well, coach is going to punish me if I miss this. So now this fear was in it. And again, it's something as simple as, oh, well, I just always seen this. You just do push-ups when you miss. But deeper level than that, I should have been fired and probably my coaching career finished before it started. But that's something where you don't look at, when you look at it deeper, and you go, why? Well, it made no sense, and we of course changed since then. So
Yeah, and I think there's, well, more and more coaches today, I think, are asking that question, right? Is what was done to me something that I need to do to others? But then again, like, there's the, okay, well, if that doesn't work, what else do I have in my toolbox? And a lot of it's already, like you said, already there in your beliefs, your values, your goals. Like, the what do I expect first has to start here and then go out, not just what does the sport tell me I should expect and then deliver. And that's where I think we're the concept of nesting, right? Taking a construct or a concept, and instead of keeping it separate, making it one of those core things that you start to build on for the values, the beliefs, the expectations. But if, as a person, discipline or determination, I'm unclear of the working definition for myself, I think it becomes difficult for someone to actually execute or goal set for others with it, because they haven't internalized that for themselves. Right. So Dave and I actually got talking about, like, use the dictionary definition of determination. And it's kind of an interesting definition today, because it's firmness of purpose. And firmness of purpose. Okay, so if firmness of purpose, and then I've got 56 million views of what's my purpose. Okay, so my purpose should be firmness, and then I'm executing determination. Or is my purpose determination, but I have to be determined in order to demonstrate purpose? That definition alone can result in confusion. And that's, I love Dave's word, authenticity.
yeah, well, I
Because if
think in that definition, Matt, like you, a lot of people think of determination as the purpose, but you're saying that the purpose has to be there before the determination can happen, right? And
Yeah.
I think that just a light bulb, or my head almost, caught on fire with thinking about that, because it's such a different way to think about determination.
Hmm. And if determination from a coach perspective is, I'm going to come out and execute something that I have, like, the sport experience for, I've got the people experience for, I already may have existing relationships with a lot of these students, so it might be different in different ways. So my values may come across differently. And as a result, the athlete may start to question authenticity. And if they're questioning authenticity, they're questioning your purpose. He or she is just there for themselves. They just want to win. And I have heard that so often from athletes who are feeling invalidated, unheard, not because the person isn't capable of that, but because they're taking on a different persona. And I think that's where we're going, okay, what's that? What are those values for you? Right. And then taking them and then boom, putting them, and you hear this, in coach literature, what are your core values? Right? What are you going to stand on to be, successful? And so, like, give us an example, Dave, of something for you that's right at a core for you, that's practical from the nesting perspective.
Yeah, well, I think the core values piece hits home for me the most in my career. And so spanning again 16 years, I think the most valuable thing I did about 2 years ago through a coach education piece where I had to sit down and write out my core values and really think about it. Because I think so many times as core values you go, well, yeah, I think relationships are important, and I think this is important and that is important. It's sort of picking cherries off a tree, but really I had to sit down and say, what's the most important to me? And mine just happened to kind of break out into an acronym, which just spells RISE. And it wasn't on purpose. It sounds like it does, but my relationships, integrity, success, and empowerment. And for me, those are simple. I can remember them, and everything that I do, I can tie them back into. I want to build relationships. I want to do it with integrity. I want to celebrate success, and I want to empower my athletes. And that is it. Now, it sounds simple when I say it. It's easy for me to communicate now. That process wasn't easy. It took 14 years to get to that point. It took a lot of time to get to that, but that I know now that when I do things and make decisions and try to lead, I'm built based on those things. And I think for me, that's what drives me, that's what fuels me. And when I hit adversity, it gives me a checkpoint. I can always go back and does it follow those four things? If it doesn't, I need to reevaluate. If it does, let's just keep going forward and trust that this is the right path because it's true to who I am.
Hmm. So then, what a great segue to a sort of our next discussion, Dave, because when you're talking about, how does something like that become a core? Then you experience adversity, right? And in experiencing adversity, so often, I mean, models of stress have us, say, well, actually, one of the better examples in literature right now is how come intelligence isn't more of a priority in coaching? And because intelligence is, it just isn't after a certain threshold, because as soon as stress passes that threshold, then experience takes over. Well, if we're doing experience, then it's behaviors. And if I haven't decided to raise that level for myself, then intelligence, like you just saying, integrity, you're talking about relationships. What am I leaning on when stress hits instead of just, I'm going to go with whatever I usually do or what I've done in the past? And for any parents that are watching this, that's that echoing voice that you get in your head where you're like, oh man, I sound like my dad, or I like sound like my mom. Hey, great. You already know what that stress threshold sounds like. And you are doing it in coaching too. And so you're using those values as things that are going, okay, I'm going to push that threshold. I'm not going to wait for experience. I'm going to train it. So then how do they go astray? What happens when that coaches wander from that?
Yeah, well, so I think, and you talked about goal setting at the start of this thing. Goal setting is something that, you set up and everyone now does it. They do a checklist, they put in their little team binder and keep it there. But a lot of times we don't sort of go back to them until we hit something that causes us to go back to them. Where coaches can have trouble and fail is when they're reactive and not proactive. And I think too many times I've been reactionary to things of, oh, well, this didn't work in this moment, let's switch paths. Let's go to a different path altogether. Well, that just puts us farther and farther away from what's actually who we are. And I think if you're able to slow down the process or have something that you can lean on in those moments, you can go back to them. And I think that's where, if I ever, look at mistakes, I think it's done reactionary. And that's where we will leave them until we need them, right? We don't think of these these concepts that we're talking about until we hit something. But why can't we work on them and build them like a physical skill all the way up to the moment? I don't teach a layup after we miss one in a game. We're going to teach it beforehand. It needs to be the same way with this.
Hmm. What a great example. I don't go, but like you're saying that, but there are a lot of people who do, we missed 32 layups in this game. So on Monday, we're going to work.
Yeah.
But where were they to begin with? Have they just not been being worked on? Have they been focused on? Where's the breakdown? Is it an actual skill? Is it stress? Is it under duress? Is it how they work? Like, there's so many factors that go to work on that. But if I'm always in that reactive place, I can be, I'm gonna say this with the utmost respect, but a very difficult bias, which is a self-serving bias, right? If we're successful, it's because of what we've done. If we're failing, it's because of what you're not doing. And that self serving bias can really fall out in coaching because we maybe feel defensive, we're stressed, we've got tons of bosses, all those other kinds of things. And so I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think that also goes back, if I'm not mistaken, to the very first thing you said, Dave. It's like, hey, how does that fit for me? What does that look like for me as a coach to be able to execute this? Because if I'm not, then I'm leaning harder and harder on that self-serving bias. And that's not helping my athletes as well.
Yeah, I think with leadership, everyone's looking at you for the answer and the solution, and I think it's quicker to sort of be able to say, "Oh yeah, we'll change, we'll go in a direction that you want to go in, or someone else wants to go in. The pressure is somewhere else." But again, that looking inward part of it, that's what's going to guide you in those moments, and that's what's going to make it real and make it authentic and make it work. Is that you have to have faith in what you're doing is right, and how do you have faith in that? You have faith it's by building it on things that are important to you. So like I talked about my four things, like me building it on that, I know that I'm going in the right direction because I know what's important to me is true to me, and it's important uh, to have success in going forward. So I think it's got to be real.
Hmm. Well, and so to make that real for one more step, I think Dave and I had talked about this, and I locked it away in my head because I wanted to bring it up. And David said this is, if I'm going to have some success in those relationships, or I'm going to have success and integrity, then I can't work two. I've got to work three. And if there's competition on Friday, or there's competition on Wednesday, or there's competition on Saturday, then it doesn't end. It's not enhanced. It's not highlighted. It might be strained, but it doesn't stop because I got there. That's one of the factors to me where nesting determination, or nesting, what it is that's important to you, fails because it seems to end when it's measured in competition. And it doesn't end. It goes right through. And if it doesn't get any stronger, it's not going to improve a team's performance or a player's performance in life, let alone games, let alone stress. Sorry, soapbox away, but I unpack that a little bit because that was really valuable when we were talking about it.
Yeah, I think it helps shape the athlete as well. Again, I can't think about when I started coaching, I would plan it and think of, okay, let's get to competition. Let's get to that on Friday. Let's get to that on Saturday. But if it just kind of keeps going in those small parts of it, it's hard to invest in the bigger picture. It's hard to apply these concepts with bigger, touch and purpose and change when
Mhm.
they're always small goals because they just keep going forward. And I think what I've noticed with my athletes are get a better sense of the bigger picture. We talk, of course, it's the cliche almost in basketball, talking about process over outcome. And I think it's so important to train that. And if I say process over outcome, but every week after a game, if I'm changing what our process is after the outcome, then it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. So I have to remain consistent in my processes. I'll tweak them, I'll change them, I'll move them, but I'm not going to just throw it out the window when it doesn't work because again, it's true to me, and my athletes can buy into that. And now that's we can talk about culture and everything. That's what helps drive culture is this consistent, bigger picture view of seeing through things and onward to the ultimate goals.
Hmm. And I think, of a lot of professionals, Dave, I hold teachers in very, very high regard, and because this is something that is often given, put in front of them at all, at all times at staff meetings, and in mission statements for the districts that they work for, and keeping it live, and check-ins and staff meetings. And so, I mean, you've got a population of people that we get to talk to today who see how valuable this is, but may not see how or where it might break down, or how I'm actually breaking it down without even really knowing it. And I'm going to go back to that step one constantly throughout our talk today, because I think it's so valuable to have that metacognitive perspective, to step back and think about my thinking, right? I need to think about my thinking before I'm expected to get someone else to do this, to actually execute that well intentioned, purposeful, driven word called process, right? And that process is, that means there's no stop. It's through it on all times. So I really like that, how you worded that. I wrote down that proactive idea fits very clearly with working through it. And in this case, we're talking about something that is 9 months from, in some cases where volleyball or basketball starts for sport in schools, it starts in August, right? And it gets flowing in, and they're in season right away, and it's bang, 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 bang. But most of the coaches will have, that grade 10 or that grade 9 for 4 years. So it's not like, yeah, I'm now a junior. It's year one to year three. And that year three person can be imparting knowledge on year one person. And that's one of the ways that I think well, how it becomes powerful and becomes live for people when they start to realize that it isn't something within them, it's something within it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think legacy is something we started talking about more
Mm,
when I came to university level, dealing with athletes for 5 years. And originally, I thought that legacy happened through continuation of players. You would sort of move them through the charts of year one to year three to year five, and that would sort of be how legacy happens. And I think there's two parts of it. I think the individual are the connectors; they help to sort of mentor and teach and pull it along, and that could happen at high school, like you said, for the grade 9 athlete and the grade 12 athlete. But the other connector for the legacy or the consistency of a program is the consistent leadership, and the consistent values of leadership. And that
mhm,
you're consistent in your processes. Again, they might change. The way I coach a team is very different from my first year to my 16th year. It's very different. But there's things that are interwoven in that keeps that together. And I think that's where the coach has to understand that their voice and their direction, they're the glue that kind of ties it all together. The pieces will change, but you've got to connect it every year. And that's how you're going to connect it, through that consistency of, again, working through that consistency of process.
mhm. Well, and I think that speaks though to, you go all the way back to what we just said as dictionary definition of determination, right? Is your purpose is rarely going to be, well, you said like rise doesn't stand for win. I don't see a W in there.
Mhm.
But we know on a foundation of those principles, you see people's mindsets, you see people's, grit, you see people's mental toughness start to grow and thrive, because those are stable things. Those are stable constructs. Those become things that are live all the time for a coach and a program. And that's why the advantage of school is there, even if like, wow, our competitive season is so short. Well, I see that person daily, right? And sometimes like 4 or 5 times a day. And I want to start making those concepts live. I want them to live somewhere. And so this is where we start to bridge to effective goal setting. And sometimes where we say ineffective or goal setting become ineffective is that we're not clear on something like performance expectancies. And we're not clear on what's called situations. So where do those situations present themselves? How thorough have I been as a coach in looking at what those expectations or the expectancies for performance? Notice the performance, what we think of, we go, well, I'm talking to coaches, so it must mean sports. No, no, we're not talking about just that, because you haven't heard Dave mention in here is relationships, integrity, success, and Oh my goodness.
Empowerment.
Empowerment,
Yeah.
those don't have anything to do just exclusively with, Monday's practice. Those have to do with every time you see me. The performance expectancies, that means that that person turnstiles out the door, and each time they go into a situation, the performance expectancy becomes those things. And if I were to establish goals based on those for someone in maybe, a grade 8 or grade 9, that might be tough, right? But you don't just have them for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Your language becomes those expectancies. But if I haven't done that work, the situations, when do I have them? What do I have them for? How often informally do I see them? What are my expectations? What are those opportunities that present themselves? And then I have a thorough understanding of how to establish goals. So, Dave, you're nodding, go.
Yeah, I think where the magic happens, especially when I think of younger athletes, is when you connect these philosophies to things bigger than sports. And you're talking about how, a teacher sees them a lot more in different settings. When they can start to recognize some of these skills against other adversities in the classroom or off the court or out of school or with relationships away from the team, I think that's where it really has power. And I think when I'm working with athletes, I always want to sort of used to want to check every box. If I can get an athlete to figure out one piece that there's adversity in my classroom, and how can this skill that I have in my sports setting apply to that one thing, that's a win. And that's even at the university level right now. If I can get them to tie in one or two things, we're not saying change every decision. I think that's where it becomes lasting. That's where it affects athletes long term. That's where it becomes something that they can thus lean on and really becomes them.
Hmm. And the process of what's called intellectualization to internalization is exactly what Dave just said, right? If I intellectualize something, Dave says, yeah, relationships are going to be important. And I'm sitting there, and my high school coach and my junior high coach have always relationships. We always value team. And then there's a slide over to, yeah, I got to get along with my teammates. There's cohesion. Yeah, I'm going to hear the same thing all the time, right? I haven't internalized. I've actually provided myself with a block, because if my interpretation of it isn't exactly or isn't clear, and I don't have the opportunity to share that, discuss it, work through it, hear my coach go, I like what you said here. I think it's a little narrow when you're only considering sport, or I think it's a little narrow when you're only considering, adversity, right? If I look at relationships and I go, okay, relationships are important. God, I gotta love my teammates. You got my back. This is a sisterhood and a brotherhood, and it's going to be awesome. And then I've got someone out, treating teachers poorly in the classroom, and then I hear about it as the coach, and now I'm saying, hey, we prioritize relationships. There's a gap. And because the interpretation wasn't as clear it was meant, but I'm now doing it afterwards. I'm doing the layup line on Monday because we missed 30 layups. I'm not goal setting for that principle to be important on a daily basis. And that's, if I'm thinking about something like that, how is this going to make me better? Well, I mean, of not sort of bring COVID into this, but I don't think there's ever been a time where we realize just how important relationships are, and not just the relationships, like, talking, but being face to face with people, engaging, interacting, feeling, seeing nonverbal, seeing and hearing genuine verbal responses. Those things have a massive impact on the brain and massive impact on the person. So when we're sitting there, we have that opportunity to make the connections. But if we just confirm, yeah, absolutely, you're right. And then I walk away and I'm confused that the athlete isn't prioritizing how I meant, I'm the one who has not set up the goal the right way. But I'm also someone who may not have understood that that task or that challenge seems difficult for one and not necessarily for another. So that is one of the other facets of goal setting that has to be brought under the sun or under the spotlight. Because if someone doesn't feel comfortable saying, that's really hard for me to do, coach, and someone goes, super easy, I've just made that person feel even worse that they're not going to succeed at it. Okay. And so, Dave, give me an example of, like, even two athletes who saw something as maybe complex in different ways, but resulted in the same sort of outcome.
Yeah, so I think an easy one for me goes to academics. It's obviously a big thing of what we do here at the university. So a lot of teams in the academic setting, they'll set up team study halls where they get people together and they'll put them in a room and make them study a certain time and study together. I've never done that with academics, and I'm very proud of what our academic actual record is right now. Because we haven't. I always looked at it a different way. I had two athletes last year, both were 4.0 GPAs, which was unbelievable. But they're very different people. One of them plans everything weeks and weeks in advance. Does probably 2 weeks of extra work just to get ready for it. Has everything
Mhm,
planned out. Gets her 4.0. The other athlete crams it. Does it the morning of. Barely the ink is barely dry when they hand it in, but they're at their 4.0. And if I put them both in a box and say you have to study at this time, you have to work at this time, for me, it's not going to help them be who they are. And I think what Matt was talking a lot about in the goal setting piece is the voice and respecting the individual to build the strength of the team. I think that's so important because when I would set goals originally, I would just say, here are the goals. Here's what I want to get done. And it didn't go anywhere. We would write them in a notebook or they would put them down. They'd go away and we maybe think about them next September. And I, been able to work with Matt in a few different settings. And I remember the first time that we dug into deeper goal setting. And we had done the traditional way of just write down some goals, 5 minutes, we'll see you later. We had an hour session that went the whole hour. We set one goal in 1 hour. And I had a leader in the team, a veteran on that team, and they were just irate, I think is the word I can use, of
yep.
how this happened. Like, we have one goal set in an hour. This is never going to work. It's never going to happen. What are we doing? And next week, I think we maybe got one and a half, almost two goals done. And we started to kind of build and progress. And then that became, over time and everyone getting used to it, it became something that was pretty automatic afterwards. But it was just rethinking how that all works. So again, it's respecting the individuals. For that athlete, they didn't think of it that way of how it would work, but there was 6, 7, 8 other people in that room who picked up on it right away. And it's just understanding that when you're dealing with groups.
Hmm. And I mean, that's a great example because that I think a big part of that was that no matter where people were in that room or in any of the rooms, that we always met them where they were. And coaches that I've worked with over the years, I always say, like, I'll meet an athlete where they are, and that can be sometimes quite frustrating. And my disclaimer with a lot of coaches is that the coaches don't always have maximal amount of time to be able to work with every single athlete no matter where they are. That's something that coaches feel a great deal of pressure for, right? However, what Dave and I are talking about is a process that says I don't have to meet you by standing and doing this individually with every single athlete. I mean, I foster a process within my team that we have that authentic conversation. We have that genuine conversation. Because what was really cool about that is while this person was a leader, they felt so comfortable and confident to say out loud, like, I just like, like this is ridiculous. Like, and instead of like, well, can't have that kind of attitude, it was just like, well, thank you for sharing. This was really frustrating for you. And immediately, if I'm remembering correctly, David, immediately the teammates of that person were supportive, but they didn't ally. They didn't go, oh, I know this is so dumb, because the leader was struggling with it, and other people in the room went, hey, let's just keep working, right? This is kind of tough. Here's how I'm seeing. Here's how I'm seeing. So without ever really saying, we need to do cohesion this way, they did it because we gave people space to be able to execute that process,
Yeah, and
right?
in that setting, that leader that took the longest to get to it, actually it was the most effective, and came our time in a league final. It came to the time of adversity. That person was able to display all those things that we had talked about, that we had built his identity. They were the one that was able to come, but they were probably the last one to come on board. And they were, but it was a natural progression to let them get there. But when they got there on their own terms. They got there in alignment with everybody on the team, but it became true to them. It wasn't my words saying you have to be this way. They sort of accepted it, understood it, and learned from it, and it became
Hmm. And I mean, that bridges right into the next sort of topic that we were talking about is really like goal setting when it comes to constructs. We take a sport psychology or sport construct, and they're everywhere, right? Like I literally have a list of words that I have, put together and worked with over the years of read and research and literature that are all associated with sport, and everything from passion, mental toughness, competitiveness, achievement, intensity, dedication, diligence, commitment, perseverance, adversity. I can go on and on and on. And we use them when in our lens we think that's what this is, but I may not have trained them. And I had a strength coach years ago, actually, when we were talking about this, they were sitting there wrestling with it. They didn't get it. Like, it's just, this is a weird way to think about this, Matt. And all of a sudden something clicked. And the person looks at me and goes, wait a minute. Okay. So this is like the equivalent of me asking somebody in the middle of a game to come out of the game and do a set of bench press because they weren't strong enough to execute that skill. And I said, absolutely. And he goes, oh, we fail at this stuff all the time. And it was just this massive light bulb, but it needed to come on in this person's world in order for it to click, right? And that's why, we started this entire session today saying, know yourself. It's there, but I can't just use a word. We need to be more enthusiastic because I observe a lack of enthusiasm. I may have dismissed 75% of my team who are actually enthusiastic, and then 25% which aren't, but I didn't want to point them out because that's not my style of go. And now we're failing. And we're not deliberately wanting to fail, but we haven't set ourselves up for that success that we want to have,
Yeah,
right? I,
that's so important, Matt. I think when I look at over time, my focus used to be always on the problem or the weak link or the person that was upset. That's where I went to. And I spent a lot of time focusing on how to solve that. That's just naturally what people want to do. And I think the other way was, well, I have 11 of 12, or I have 10 of 12, or whatever it is that are bought in here. So let me put in the energy here. Let me put in the focus here. Let me grow this, because those two pieces, those one piece, they'll either attach or they're going to go their own way, and we're going to have to go a different direction. But
Mhm.
why punish the group of 10, the strong nucleus that you're building, for the two or three people that maybe they just don't understand it. I think I used to think of
Yeah.
those people as, oh, they're being difficult, they're opposing. No, maybe they're just untrained, uneducated in those areas. Maybe that's what we're missing. And I think I always want, as a coach, go, oh, they just don't want to buy in, they don't care. No, they care, they just don't know how to maybe apply these concepts, and those are the people we have to help up.
Hmm. And like, again, that's such a mindset shift, though, isn't it? Right? To be able to see and look at a person going, what am I getting? And then almost just sidestepping and going, what else might be there? Right. And for years, I mean, early back in my own coaching days, this is where I got started with motivation. And more people that I'm talking to, are using terms that make more sense to them, like the concept of autonomy, right? I use autonomy, and I shove it down people's throats because they're looking, going, I don't get it. And then I'm having less and less. You mean, actually, we even had this conversation. I am having less and less discussions about people confusing independence with autonomy, because it's more of language that's finding itself into literature today, because it's not either or. It's how much and how little, but it's not the how much and how little I can offer. It's how does the person see what's being offered help them choose. And we use the term buy-in in sport all the time. But like, I think of, I'm going to get on a bit of a rant here for a second, but I want you to tell me, like, give me an example. This is going to be good because this is off the cuff. It's kind of fun. Give me an example of the most, like the prototypical sport athlete that just simply complies with everything you ask them to do? What's that athlete?
Are you saying sport?
Everything.
Everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I automatically go to just someone that's a pleaser, someone that just sort of wants to make sure that they're in good standing. They're looking to maybe advance or to just keep the coach happy, keep their parents happy, whatever it is, and do what the expectation is. Nothing
Right.
out of nothing that's uncomfortable.
Hmm. And so when the nothing that's uncomfortable, they'll push themselves to a discomfort as long as you're watching,
Mhm.
right? As long as there's some favorable way that they can be evaluated, then I am actually doing exactly what the coach wants. My reason for doing what the coach wants, though, is exactly what Dave just said. This the pleasing, the reward that might come from that, right? The acknowledgement. And what we think is like, okay, this is fantastic that I've been able to really reach this person. But if that person doesn't do those things when there's no possibility of reward, they haven't made that construct their own, right? They haven't been able to buy it. And not because they can't buy it, but because they're unsure of what it actually is unless they get that feedback. And that it point becomes a problem, right? And this is where I go back to that athlete that does everything right, okay, relationships, teamwork, yeah, absolutely, I got this, and they're all in, and they're just, they're that hardworking person at practice, but then they get out of practice and they're telling you, oh no, I've been going every class, right? I've got every class. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm doing all my homework. My GPA is going to be fine, right? I'm getting all my workouts in. I'm eating right. No, no, everything's good in class. My teachers are all good. And then that the coach finds out that like you're not doing any of the work in class or little work in class, and then that wait a minute, like you're how come you're being so unkind and deceitful to your teachers? Like those two are really great teachers. Well, I just they don't get me. They don't get along with me, right? And then the coach actually feels deceived. They actually feel wronged, and they may demonstrate that sense of wrongness for the person's behavior because hey, I trusted you. I'm trusting you. I'm trusting you. And but from the goal setting perspective, what we're really hearing is, hey, I need it as much as you do. And if I'm not getting it as a coach, I'm feeling wrong. Now I need to coerce or manipulate or get that player to comply other than actually help them become more motivated. And not just for because they're missing it. They're just seeing behaviors. They're not seeing something for themselves. And so at the other end of it is that sense of congruence, right? This alignment with oneself. Like what is determination? Okay? Determination is strength of purpose. So if I'm determined, like well, an example, like can I go back to those two athletes that you had mentioned?
Yeah.
Both would be demonstrating a very high level of determination for their outcomes with their educational strivings. Okay. And the process that they demonstrate is just different, but it is congruent with the act of determination. The only way or a way that a coach can impart knowledge is to simply check in, is this working for you, right? And if the athlete A who I'm going to get them backwards, but the one who studies with committed every day kind of work, then if that person only does that for studying but then never demonstrates it for like nutrition or the weight room or anything else, and then the other athlete crams and jams everything in this way, but then does that same thing with nutrition. I got to eat well on Thursday or Wednesday because we play on Thursday or whatever. Those approaches, there's a lack of congruence. I can get compliance, but I am not giving them the opportunity to see what it is that seems to be missing and how can I progress them, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think of pre-games for me in competition. So again, one of
Mhm.
those preset things that, the coach comes in, gives the rah-rah speech, everybody loves it, and we go out and win the game. I wish it was that easy. My job would be a lot easier. But I found that with my athletes, so I've had one of my most successful athletes, but one of my most competitive athletes needed an environment pre-game where they needed to be as loose as possible. And they needed a relaxed, fun atmosphere. And again, as a competitor and kind of pre-programmed to what you think, you don't think that that's what you need. And I remember one of our biggest games, and which was this athlete's best game all around, came through in these major moments. It was pre-game. I'm pacing up and down nervously like I do, and a Beyonce song comes on. My athlete does a full Beyonce dance routine with the hair flip and the whole thing, and the old me would have shut that down. Got to get your head in. This is the biggest game. It's a league semifinal. We need to be focused. But me understanding that athlete, that I knew exactly where she was and that she was in the exact spot she needed to be. And that doesn't work for maybe 11 of the other players. They didn't maybe they weren't all doing the Beyonce dance, but for that athlete understanding what they needed. Now that came from conversations before and building before, but that outcome, if you watch it, you go, "Oh, that goofball on the floor, what are they doing?" Well, that was the most competitive, most fierce, determined, to use the word, athlete that I had because it was true to them and it was authentic to them.
Hmm. And so can I'm going to use the pregame example for a lot of athletes in my experience. And when I ask athletes for what does your pregame look like, most athletes will unpack things that have either been given to them or that they've figured out to do in order to manage the anxiety they feel for competition, right? And as a result, they stay with them, but they may not actually be the most effective tool. And so there's a good example of, like, compliance. I'm literally compliant with what I think is the most effective way of doing this, but I've never unpacked, or I haven't really looked at, or haven't had a coach who helps to unpack those skills and go, that seems different than you are over here, or how come you're so participative in classes, but for some reason you disappear into this silent mode prior to competition. That seems strange to me, right? And but yeah, and you're connecting the dots because you have so much great interaction with them as teachers, that you get to see them. If athlete A is over here in a group of people, and they're outgoing and they're relaxed and they're fluid and they're holding court and they're having fun, and then they sort of do some of that stuff in the locker room as well, and then boom, on game day, draw attention to that, because they're doing something which seems like it's the most effective way to do it, but they're not. That Where has that come from? What are their expectancies? How are they viewing this competition, or the skills that are needed to be successful in this competition? Are they matching those up with their own skill sets? And if they're not, what happened to that? Like, there's so many factors that it comes to effectiveness in goal setting that actually that strengthens that autonomy, or that choice for how to integrate them into their own daily lives.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, for me, a point I go to, like I'll go back to my example of the dancing person in warm up. Someone might say to me, "Well, how does that not disrupt everyone else? How does that not, like, you're letting that person be loose, but what if the 11 others need their own way to do things?" And the way that I would explain that is it's the understanding. So for us, autonomy is a word we talk about a lot, and understanding explaining the philosophy to everyone before that moment in the league semifinal. We're consistent with what we're doing, that we're going to be there to allow the individuals to be their best, do what they need to do to be their best, and we're going to kind of work with everybody. And you always think of, "Oh, I don't have enough time to go through and see what every need of every player on my team needs." But it's not like that, because again, something like autonomy, if you can get the overall philosophy, a lot of this can happen through the individual. You're supporting it,
Yeah.
you're building the foundation for it. So I'm not having 12 conversations every pregame. But I know in just being consistent in what we're doing and we're messaging, that's going to allow this one to work over here this way and this one to allow over here because we know we're connected to this. We're connected to the bigger vision because that big vision is what we live every day. These individual actions just add up to the sum of everything.
Hmm. And so in my language, I like to call that top down process, top down goal setting, right? Is it's in your mind to begin with, right?
Mhm.
It's not a behavior. And when you go top down, you're looking for opportunities to demonstrate it. And if the person is involved in finding those opportunities, then they're more likely to strive for success because they recognize the opportunity prior to arriving in it, rather than arriving in it and then seeing if maybe that thinking comes up. And that doesn't work, right? Well, it does, it would can, it just isn't consistent, right? So that's more bottom up goal setting is, how do we do this better, right? How can I see, like, I think, I use the example, sort of spinning off of Dave's is, when I was, I was a swim coach, would be known as quite a disciplined swim coach. But in my disciplined swim coach, I didn't recognize more and more what the athletes are needing, what they're wanting, how they best strive for success. And I had the same experience that Dave had is, we're warming up Sunday at provincials. My seniors are all in the water, my what we call 15 and over crew. And I have a big group of girls. They're 16, 17 years of age. Um, and some, I think didn't have any 18-year-olds, but we had some 19 or 20-year-old males and some younger, but they're all in the same lane. And a song comes on, and all of a sudden the girls start singing, and they're just sort of quietly singing, and I'm sort of leaning forward, and I stop and I go, "Oh, if you're gonna sing, belt it, like let's hit it." And they start booming this song, and I'm singing along with them. The guys come into the wall and they're like, "What is happening?" A couple of the guys are like, "Oh, great." And they start singing along. And I actually talked to coaches afterwards, and the same message came, was like, you know, it looks like your team kind of lacks some discipline. Like you're kind of taking this a little lightly. And I said, maybe, but yet we had the best performance of the weekend from many of those athletes on Sunday. Now, was it exclusively that thing? I don't know. But I do know if I squash that, I have no athlete coming to tell me, you know, I didn't get to prepare the way I wanted to prepare. And that might be one of the reasons why I'm underperforming. And it has to do with you. I'm never going to hear that message from an athlete, but it's definitely going to come out in other ways. Right. And so I think it's so valuable to impart that process, to be as aware of oneself. What is it my athletes need? How do they affect others? Right. And what's that bigger picture? Is this greater than this 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 4 minutes, whatever? Yes, it has to be.
Yeah,
Right.
and I had an example as well of something that's kind of in the different part of it. So I had an athlete who um, had a mom who was a high level basketball coach, very successful, came from a
Mm,
very uh, rich in sport history family, and she came to me and she said, "Hey, I'll do anything you need as a coach. There's one thing you got to make me a deal. You just can't do goal setting with me." And my eyes crossed because I'm like, well, what? Wait, what? I don't want to hear the thing. I guess the athlete had gotten probably a lot of it at home or other situations. Didn't want to deal with goal setting. So I had this athlete for 5 years. She left as one of our most decorated athletes of our program, award winner, one of our best all-time athletes. She got into dental hygiene school, and she's going through it. And they ask her for goal setting because that's a major part of their program, which she didn't understand, I guess, when she got into it. And she texted me back and she said, "Wait a minute. You've taught me goal setting for 5 years. I just didn't realize that it was that." But she was on the other side of it, where if we made it in front of her and put it on top of her that these are the goals, very, very structured, it was going to give her anxiety. It wasn't going to work for her. So, we talked the stories of the loose atmosphere. This was the other part of it where the anxiety came from. So it's kind of like the vegetables and the spaghetti sauce. You just found a different way to mix it in, and the messaging was still there, but it's getting to the athlete of what they need at that time.
mm-hmm. And I love that example. I think it's so fun. because it's literally implicit learning, right? Like you don't even know you're learning, and then you're just learning, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, right? It just comes. And I mean, the same thing, like the strength coach, like it'd be wonderful, but it's knocking at a door for a while, and then all of a sudden, bing, the light bulb comes on. But if I make decisions about, okay, well, they're not doing this well because I'm making this the most important process. I'm making goal setting. You have to do goal setting, you have to drill goal setting, right? Then I potentially lose them, right? Lose interest, lose rapport, right? I'm not fostering the relationship I say is valuable, right? I'm saying that it's valuable provided you do what I ask you to do, which is compliance. I
Yeah.
don't make the relationship valuable if you're doing what you need to do and have identified those goals clearly for me, like the athlete that is probably going to warm up a little bit differently, and it's clear to the teammates that they're going to warm up a little bit differently, and that's how they're going to warm up, and that's okay. That's called a process goal, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a process goal. That is not an outcome goal. That's not we're hitting 75%. That is a process goal of what is it that this person needs to do. And the big picture is it's connected to X goal, right? Whatever that is.
Yeah, and it's not
Right.
in somebody else's words. It needs to be, now your words can guide it and dictate it and help it get there. But for this process goal to work, it has to be in their words. And like I said, their
Mhm.
handwriting before. This needs to be authentic to them as much as we talk about the vision needs to be authentic to you, because that's where the process will connect. If it's a process that you set up for somebody that's totally unrealistic or totally not connected to what drives them, it might work, but chances are it's not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable in any way.
Well, and even if effectiveness is short term, right? Because we know like the punishment or consequence modality, it'll work because we'll see increases in effort, right? I mean, if I say, okay, again, increases in effort, and they occur, now I go, now we're talking about effort. But I didn't establish that as the process to begin with. I didn't establish this drill as something that's required of maximal effort because I didn't do it at the start of practice and I didn't do it at the start. I can see someone demonstrate determination after I bring up determination. That's compliance. And so I don't ever get a chance to bridge compliance to themselves, right? And allow them to practice it on in terms for themselves. And I think that that's one of the ways that process goal setting fails is that we don't provide sort of the arena for what that actually means, because process goals are 100% under the control of the person. And if I'm trying to control their process, I'm mining away or whittling away the desire for themselves to be able to internalize that concept. Taking like example, right? If I say determination, but they don't use the word determination, okay, then that's fine. That's where we are. We have someone who's compliant and going determination. Okay, got it. But if I just yell at people about determination and how important it is, I don't give any progression to what determination actually is going to look like for them. Right. And so if I take that and I go, okay, well, determination in your own words is, right. And then I get someone who does this. Yeah. Okay, hang on. I got my phone, coach. Firmness of purpose. And then I smile. And then the coach goes, yeah, right on, Dave. And then I go, oh, yeah. And I'm now pumped because I got the coach to cheer me on because I Googled it faster than everybody else. That's okay. And now I go, okay, explain it to me. And they go, huh? Well, firmness of purpose. I just told you. No, no. Tell me what that means to you. And what did it look like today from your day in different ways? And then they go, and if I rescue them from that moment, I pull them away from autonomy, away from self determination, away from internalizing and taking on that determination to be their own. Right. And I don't do it I firm believer that I don't think coaches do this intentionally and people don't do this intentionally, but they do it often for self-serving needs. I'm uncomfortable. I want to rescue that person from their discomfort right now. I want this to go faster. We need to hurry up. I look silly. They look silly. Maybe they need a little bit of help. So I'll give them the entire answer. That's not a little bit of help, right? That's the same as my strength coach. It's just, oh, he's just not strong enough. Now go and do a set of bench press, right? No, don't worry about it. I got this. I'll do it for you, right? Ah! Now get out there and be strong. And you're like, what happened? Right? That's the psychological equivalent of telling somebody, I'm going to rescue you from actually making this make sense to you. And we need those situations to be theirs. We can cultivate a few of them, but I think that's where that teacher, boom, it's so much bigger because they know that they have 7.193877 minutes or hours of time with these athletes and these students, and they have hall contact and lunchtime contact and teaching contact and training contact and sport contact. And oh, that's like a dream, right? To be able to do that.
Yeah, I think when I got on campus here at the university, and same thing, having contact with athletes in different settings, what I think is so key in the training area, but also away, is when you can recognize and identify those concepts with them or for them in other settings. Like we talked about other things, like if they can see it in the classroom or in the hallway or somewhere else, I think
Mm,
the coach's job is to point out those successes and until they become habit. But when then you're having the athletes talk about those successes back to you, that's when you know the
mm,
connection is starting to come there. When it's being communicated back, it's being identified. And Matt talked about that moment of silence. I remember we were doing an exercise with Matt with our team where it was looking internal for behavior. And we sat in silence and Matt was leading the session. Now it probably was 5 minutes. Now think about 5 minutes of total silence until someone came up with an answer. And we stayed there. It felt like 55 minutes. But when it came, and 5 minutes is a long time, it came, and then all of a sudden it kind of came pouring out. And every time we did it, of course, the gap got smaller, but it came out of the person. And what they were able to do was not only start to identify internally, but also externally and in other spots too. So now the view changed. We were able to
mm.
zoom out, zoom in, and be able to get that. But it was, yeah, we sat in that moment for a really long time, but it became something that became true to them.
Hmm. Well, and it goes back to the skill of the coach demonstrating, reflection for themselves, doing that inner work, because the coach's behaviors, if they're congruent with the coach's beliefs and the characteristics, right? It's usually not incongruence that we feel off. It's when things are incongruent that we feel off. And my behavior may not line up with my characteristics. Like, and I think so often where my early years coaching football, you know, I had an athlete years after they graduated tell me two things, well, kind of what did I learn from Matt? Well, number one, that is the volume of his voice is going to be the same, whether you're 5 yards away or 80. And so everybody was playing the left side receiver because they could just be as far away from my booming voice as possible. And then the second thing was that I overloaded, I had more plays and reads for a high school football team than they got when they got to university. It was actually a relief when they got to university because there was less work to do mentally. And which is ironic because the two things that I hated as an athlete were yelling and being overloaded with information and expected to always know everything all the time and no longer depend on myself as an athlete. And here I was as a coach trying to do the same thing I didn't like. And it took a few weeks. And I went, oh, and I still have on file a letter of apology that I wrote and read to that team because it took me a minute, but man, it was a gutting experience. And it's one of the things that led me down this path today is to always look and break apart. What is my behavior and how is it perceived by the athlete? Is it consistent with what I said I am? And are those values, beliefs, uh, are they consistent with the goals that we've established? Because if they are, the athletes are likely doing the things that have been established clearly by you. And now I just have to look at the things that aren't. And the better that we get at connecting those things to the athletes, right? The better we get at connecting with the athletes. And now you see that push towards more internal motivation or intrinsic motivation, more purpose, because it becomes about the athlete, not about the behavior. And I just think that when you have that, when you see that, when it clicks for them, hey, get excited. And that I like, if I kind of am on the right track, Dave, it's that proof, the consistency with what they think, what they feel, and what they're doing, and the successes. What's it going to look like when you have success? Then what's it going to look like if you have continued success?
Yeah.
If it
And
feels
then
good
that's as a
now,
coach, that's the fun part because
yeah.
that's where you now have to support it. You need to water the plant and give it all the nutrients it needs because now it's ready to grow. And I think that's the best part of this whole process.
Hmm. And the coach development model that I operate from is, has a whole other side of it to look at athlete personal characteristics, and those are the kinds of things that I think are really important because today's athlete isn't just participating in the school sport. They're participating in a club sport. They're participating in a team sport over here. They're participating in individual sport over here. They're participating in, spring something. They're in camps. Every single one of those experiences provides them with information from the sport and information from the coaches, and they start to form their own perceptions and interpretations of those behaviors, right? And in those perceptions, they're still going to drive and collide sometimes with what they see you doing and what they bring from all those other places. And a little bit of an internal part is that sometimes we hear this in coaching is if, as a coach, you gotta come in hard and heavy to ensure that there's respect. Okay. Now, if this athlete had a coach who came in hard and heavy and then just made it worse, this coach already comes in the door. And this athlete has now started to lose traction, become less motivated. They know what they're going to get. They're making a decision about you. They're making a decision, and it's all coming from the past, right? So I think that's such a valuable piece is that coach knows how they need to be. And sometimes me even the other way too is that coach doesn't come in heavy and the athlete goes, well, they're soft, right? I can push this coach around. I don't have to do anything. They lack discipline. They're not a hard. Dave, talk about that experience with coaching and sort of the evolution of the role of a coach.
Yeah, I always go back and you used the phrase earlier today. It's meet people where they are, meet them where they are because I'm the other way. So I don't come in hard and heavy. It's just not who I am. And some people can and do it effective, but if you're going to do it, you need to be consistent. It needs to make sense of why
Mm,
hard and heavy is for you. For me, it's not for me. But I've had many athletes say, "Well, you need to yell at me. I play better when you yell at me." And I don't care who you are or who's watching today, go scream in someone's face and see if performance improves. It's not going to happen. So, but it's understanding that what does that person need? Well, that person wants that almost to be let off the hook, to sort of be yelled at, and now their focus can be somewhere else than what the task is in front of them. But that's meeting them where they are. So I have to figure out how I can meet that person plus the 11 other people. But I'm there to try to find that place. Now, sometimes you can't. I think coaches naturally go, "Oh, that just means you're going to give them what they want." No, that's not the case. I'm still going to have expectations. I'm still going to set it up where it needs to be, but it's going to be authentic to me. But there's going to be an expectation that they have to get to. But I'm willing to make it more individualized to strengthen them, to strengthen the group, and sort of meet them where they are, meet them in the middle.
mhm. And I think that's such a great example, Dave, and of the sort of quote unquote or so to speak yeller, um, from a motivation perspective, from pretty much any psychological perspective, and that is cognitive psychology, that is developmental psychology, that is motivational psychology, that is personality psychology. I can keep going if you want me to, but there's not one shred of evidence that that behavior strengthens a person's mindset. It doesn't. If it did, it's very individual. And in that individual experience, the demonstration of autonomy is actually for giving up choice. So, in a way, like you said, that athlete says, you need to yell at me. If I need to yell at you, when is it that you need me to yell at you? What is the context of me yelling at you? What are the words that you need me to yell? What's the ideal volume of my voice? How is it that you'd like to be shown? Is it within proximity to others or it is in close space? Where would you like me not to yell at you so that I eliminate other environments? And they don't have all those details. So I go and say, okay, what's the next one? Because likely that athlete is not in a sense of compliance, but just one more step down, which is called interjected. And their interjected form of regulation is that I need a sense of guilt for not doing something in order to get to an ideal emotional state or cognitive state in order to strive for success. But I wasn't feeling guilty because I didn't know if I was letting you down or not. Now I do. And as a result, now they're performing. But they also can look from that pleasing perspective and say, coach is really going to watch me now. And now I can thrive. And so are we looking at an athlete that's really, again, determined in their motivation because their purpose is exclusively having the attention of the coach, whether it's internal and guilty if I'm letting them down, or whether it's their immediate attention in the moment. And if that's how I want or need that athlete, as a coach, you had better follow them around everywhere, which I know most coaches can't do. In fact, I don't think there's any coaches, other than maybe one I can think of. But other than that, I don't think we're going to do that. So I want to foster stronger internal motivation. And as Dave and I mentioned, putting these things in our own words, that nesting idea, determination itself is in actions for 5 minutes in math class, right? But if they don't put it in their own words, they won't think of math class. And then put it in their situations, right? If I just hand her I can do this. I can say, you need to be determined. Was that clearer than you need to be determined? Is that better? I don't know if that came across clear, but that's still me, right? I want them to identify those situations where some might be really easy to demonstrate determination. Some are going to be really hard, right? But they're the ones that are going to foster that understanding. And that's where I think you get the connection. It's like now that R, right, back in Rise, that relationship. Okay, I've got a coach who's buying into me. I'm not trying to get that athlete to buy into this. The coach buys in to me, right? And I'm doing this in a deliberate, actionable way, in a way that they're strengthening a value over time, right?
Yeah.
What's coming up for you, Dave?
Yeah, I think of like with the athlete and that process, they'll start in the reflective piece. They'll go
Mhm.
back to the reflective piece. That's what you'll start to work through. You'll go back and say, remember this, what was going through here, your head here, what we were doing. It'll move to, if it can move to the moment, in the moment, that's you recognizing it as a coach and pointing it out and highlighting those successes and saying, look, it's right here. If they start to see that, then it becomes easier for them to then look ahead. But you're going to start behind, then you're going to get to the moment, then you're going to move ahead. I think with some of these athletes to process it. Now, some of them might look at it differently, but it's a process for them to be able to kind of connect all three of those areas when they're looking at how do these things apply, how do I use them, what decisions do I make.
And you brought up decision making as something, and decision making. I think of decision making for a 15-year-old and decision making for a 22-year-old, very different, right? And decision making in and of itself it's often a behavior, right? It's what decision did you make? Could you make a better decision? And I think of Friday Night Lights when I think of what will your mind do? What will your brain do? If he's lined up inside, what will your brain do? Well, you throw outside. You're gonna throw outside. You're gonna throw outside. And he's just screaming at him. And I remember like that, just like for a number of people, that's like now he's getting coached, and I think, huh, because I know I make great decisions when someone's just right up in my business, screaming at me about trying to get my brain. No, it doesn't work for me. But afterwards, I get this sense like, okay, coach really had to yell at me, and I'm gonna go thank the coach for for yelling at me. So often there's that reflective piece, right? Is that a year later or 3 years later, I go, our coach made me stronger. No, they didn't. There's no brain research that actually shows, threatening somebody to make a decision will actually increase decision making skills. None. That's not going to work. But we do see a ton of research on effective decision making when a person is relaxed, calm, processing fluidly, emotionally in the right place. Because it goes back to what we were saying about the coach. If a coach is only going to depend on experience for intellect, right? And it limits to here. I haven't had any experience higher than that, right? Then that means that whatever my experience has been in stressful situations, I'll do. And that's where that coaching style continues. Because 3 years later, the athlete thinks that that was valuable, but it's 3 years later. In that moment, if we were able to pause the moment and say, how's your thinking right now? Right? It's not good. It's not healthy. It's not right. It's not in the right place, not the athlete mindset. And we're definitely have two people who wouldn't be demonstrating determination nor connection.
Yeah.
Right. So like
Yeah.
drill into those experiences and understand what's needed for the moment. It's usually not that a process. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's as a coach, you'll get asked, well, then how do you practice it? How do you make this work? And for me, I'm not so much, I'll script some adversity in practice, but I'm not going to script where I'm going to tell someone to yell at somebody and cause that adversity. But we're going to put them into realistic situations. But what I think is key is what you said is I think where it's the most valuable, and I've said it a few times, is catching it in the moment and pointing it out in the moment when it's happening, when it's happened, when it's fresh in their minds, having someone just quickly say, "Hey, you see what's happening here? This," or "What are you seeing right now?" Getting that feedback in that moment, that's how you train it. Because when they get into competition and when you're disconnected from them as a coach on the floor or wherever you are in your field of competition, they're gonna have to be able to process it without you. And we talked about that the player that needs the coach to yell. You can't be there for all those moments. And we also talked about all those moments in the classroom, in the hallways, wherever else in the school setting. That's where it starts to happen. But you can train it by just recognizing it, catching it, catching it. Now it becomes where they can start to catch it on their own.
Hmm. And development of introspection, right? Insight, those moments, and well, I would say that's the perfect opportunity for an athlete following a competition to evaluate, not in the moment, right? Insight, they're available, they're present in the moment, they're mindful, they're playing, they're fluid, they're free, they're demonstrating determination in a 2-second time span, but they don't think about determination. They don't have to. It's been embedded and ingrained and internalized over time. So, um, I I want to give a couple of summary points here, Dave, and jump in wherever you feel if I'm missing something. But you know, number one step that we talked about, embedding or nesting this performance mindset. Sometimes we think like, okay, how do I get mental toughness? How do I be my athletes to be more mentally tough? And then I can go back to a story with Dave years and years ago. I wandered around for about 18 months, wandering and asking questions about what mental toughness was to different coaches. And I got so many different working definitions of mental toughness that I thought, I wonder how many athletes interact with these different coaches. But our coaches are saying, going to demonstrate mental toughness. But then you go out and you watch the coaches, and a lot of them weren't demonstrating the very thing that they suggested the athletes needed to be. And right off the bat, we had a gap, right? So both of our advice in this way is go, I'm going to zoom out and really start to look inward. What are these things that matter to me? Don't choose 54 words. Okay. Choose three or four. Dave's got four, right? Might be one. And that's where you start to internalize that message for yourself instead of just look for opportunities to clap and use a term because it's unclear, right? I had a grade 10 physics teacher that said the word quintessence, and I immediately became overwhelmed and I went to sleep. I dropped physics shortly thereafter. In that sense, I missed the term. Like I could have gotten it. I would love to have because I learned a ton about physics later on in my life. And then I thought, man, I wonder if I just would have just asked what the heck that meant instead of just going, I don't know anything about and then to sleep. I might have been able to foster a really strong relationship with physics, right? But I had a teacher who understood it really well, and I wasn't. And we got coaches who understand this stuff really well, maybe for themselves, but then it doesn't mean the same thing or they get overwhelmed with it, right? The second one is what happens when it goes astray. I think Dave's advice here, being proactive, and it's got to be throughout, right? And when we're talking throughout, it means I've got 9 months. I don't have 6 weeks, right? That stuff is for like, health and fitness advice, like 6 weeks to sexy abs. Okay. We're not talking about something that's 6 weeks to determination. We're talking about determination being something of a process to internalize within them. And if I'm reactive to it, I've got to step back to step one. I've got to, okay, man, I missed something in step one for myself, and I've got to check that, right? And that misstep in goal setting, right off the bat, we've already started to talk about how to effectively goal set without ever having a process yet. Okay. And so I really, really liked how Dave framed that. We want to know how it might not work. So let's avoid the missteps prior to it ever not working. Right. And so if Dave, you're nodding, anything to add in that sense, because I think it was a really strong part of our
Yeah, I
presentation.
think I almost think of it, Matt, as a volume knob, and where you're just kind of turning it up and turning it down at times. It's not so much you're turning it off or you're getting rid of it. You're just kind of you're going to be keeping your hand on the knob and just kind of controlling the intensities, your focuses, your priorities, what you're doing. But you've got to stay moving forward in one direction. And I think that's the key part of it is that you're not turning it off or changing the channel. You're just kind of controlling it, the intensities up and down.
I like that. I love that. I'm putting love in them. I love that. Okay. And then that bridges really well to number three is make it live, right? If I'm going to make something live, I've got to have a good script and a good understanding. And then I'm going to make that live. So I'm going to be able to recognize it, right? I've got to be able to recognize determination in my own sense and what I might see them demonstrating for effective determination. But then that's got that interpretation. So we started that bridge right away. My values and beliefs may be about determination. That's great as a coach, and I want to execute that. But in the back of my mind, I've got this pressure from sport that I've got to be a different way. And so now instead of that interpretation being theirs, it's mine. And we started to lighten up the compliance part. Is I can get great compliance from athletes, but that would mean that I need to be there all the time being the reward or punishment, and that's not effective motivation for them. So as well as I start to think and link, I've got to take this personal thing or I've got to take this thing, and now I've got to figure out how they're seeing it. I know how I see it, I got to see how they're seeing that, right? And if they see it this way, that bridges to that fourth step in progression. How can I progress this? And not determination, but the person's internalization of determination. And there's where you start to see executable behavioral situations and evidence. Okay. So Dave, take us through a little bit about what's going on for you or what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a little bit of this, like, and taking these steps forward. I think it's, and I'll, in summary, I would say you have to take these things off the page. And like, I like your terms of making it live. You need to take it from, your computer screen or your notebook or wherever it is, and start to put it in front of you. And I think even yourself, like, I know with reminders, like I would write things down on practice points. I would put, rise is my term. I put that in front of me. Put it in front of you until you see it, but you need to kind of take these things and put them into live settings. That's where you start to play and experiment and figure it out.
Hmm. And I like the play because that also strengthens that relationship part for you is if they say, it's really strong here, but it isn't very strong here, right? I can't just tell them, well, they've got to be stronger there,
Yeah.
right? I think that that's my strength coach's aha moment is I got to be stronger there. It's like, well, probably going to take me 6 to 8 weeks for hypertrophy. So it might take even longer for a person to internalize determination. And the internalize it is not either or, it's a progression. And so if we progress from that, I've got to make it that way for the athlete. No, no, no. I need to work with the athlete to make it that way for themselves. And they're not going to need you anymore. They're going to need you less and less and less, which, you know what? Dave talked earlier about clarity of thinking. When they need you less and less to do those things, they're more present in those moments. And that's the bridge to me where you see somebody who's taken on determination and goes into a practice and then goes into a test and then goes into their study habits, goes into their nutrition, goes into their strength conditioning, goes into their recruiting, goes into their leadership, because the purpose is greater than all of that stuff. It is a combination of all that stuff, but it lives in, and there's the nesting connection or the embedding connection, it lives in their day to day situations. And their day to day situations have to be self identified. They don't have to be, but they can be fostered and identified in a great relationship with a coach. And then catching them in those moments. I love Dave's words that find that success and celebrate it. Find the proof that this is happening, but not just because you see it, but because they see it. You hear coaches all the time, they're asked, like, even in early NCCP stuff, it's like, well, you've got to really get some reflective listening skills and some good questioning skills. So automatically, a lot of times people go to the cognitive realm. You know, did you see what I just saw? Closed-ended question. Now it's about what it is that I saw and the importance of possibly letting me down. That's now prioritized the moment, which is not what you actually want to get. What did you experience there? Maybe too broad, right? And it's finding some of those ways of questioning and connecting. I guess to me, that's what I'm hearing Dave say, and in coaching, finding those ways of connecting, you're going to be better. You're going to be better at figuring out where they are on this compliance to congruence stage.
Yeah, coaches are problem solvers, right? That's what we think we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be the one with all the answers. And what I've learned, and especially coaching female athletes for this long, what I've learned is one of the best weapons in your toolbox, in your coaching toolbox, are the athlete's voice. That's probably the best thing you have to use to help you solve these problems or solve these issues, are the people that you're working with. And again, it's adjusting, how much you're using or what you're listening to, but it's also what you're asking, what you're trying to get out of them. It's communication styles, and those are things that I've spent hours or months and years on, working on, that I think I'm never going to stop focusing on, because that's the most powerful thing you have to help you figure that whole whiteboard out, is the athlete's voice, the person's voice, and then listening to your own voice and putting those things together. That's your culture, that's your organization, that's everything. But it's got to take kind of from both places.
Hmm. I want to leave our session today with one effective question that I think that bridges really well into what Dave just said. Is that um, a great thing to say to an athlete is, my understanding when you said this, did this, is blank. Is that consistent with yours? And it's a yes or no question, but because it allows you to share your perception, if it isn't, then they can help you correct what you saw. You may not have been correct. I i i dislike the idea of the master motivator, because if I only observe behavior and consider myself a master motivator for behavior, I only have a small portion of the equation. I might be a master motivator at compliance. That's not motivation. It's a form of motivation, but it isn't very determined or self determined motivation. And so I want to understand that voice. And I get that. Like, I love this Dave put out on the bottom, talk about it, right? Have those conversations about it. But have the conversations like, my understanding is this. And they go to go, that's not what I mean. Oh, man. Okay. And now we get on the same page literature that we use so often in sport, right? So that's sort of my imparting sort of statement or question or inquiry process. Dave, anything you'd have for our coaches and participants today?
Yeah, I'll add to that last piece, Matt. I think where that really hits me is I was an assistant coach for a number of years before I became a head coach. And one of my jobs is to debrief athletes when they come off the floor. So fresh out of competition to have the conversation with them. And what I would do is I would be the problem solver. I'd be going, okay, you got to do this and this and this. Don't do this again. Don't do this again. And it would kind of come, but there would be no conversation. And the biggest change I made as an assistant coach was the first question I would ask them every time they come off is, what did you see out there? And it would be to them an open-ended question of, what did you see? Now, I had feedback that I wanted to give them, but I would give them a chance to communicate to me what they saw. And we would go any direction. We might go from behavior to technical to tactical to anything in between. But it would help us get to a conversation point where we could now start to sort of problem solve together, and it was collaborative. Okay, that's an issue
Mm,
for you. Let's work on this. Have you thought about this side of it as well? Now we can meet in the middle. And I think that communication piece that you said, that's kind of rang a bell for me, is that's what's so important and really changed the way that I approach athlete communication from there. Um,
mhm,
yeah, so that's just, I just wanted to add to that last point. As far as in closing, I would say that the best way for this, and I touched on it before, but the best way for you to look at that board and not be overwhelmed. And trust me, the first time thought about these things, I go, oh my gosh, my eyes are crossing. This is so much. But I knew I was close to something. And the way I would take it is take it off the board, take it off the screen, and start to put it in front of you. Write it down in your words on your practice plans. I would post it on a bulletin board in front of me. I'd put these little reminders. I still put them all over the place. Put them into your conversations with your coaching staff. Put them into your regular conversations. That's where it starts to like almost be around you. And you don't have to, this is going to kind of look and sound different for everybody. But as long as it's authentic and true to you, that is when you're going to have your most success. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I can give you today is really take this opportunity. If you do nothing else out of this, and I know everyone's going to do everything we talked about today, but do nothing else, really try to figure out deep down to yourself what is important to you as a leader in your coaching context. What do you really want to represent? What do you want to be? What do you want your program to be? You will get a very far way to a path of success if you can start to answer those questions.
right on. I'm gonna wrap it up on that. I think that's fantastic advice. And I'm not a prescriptive person. I like Dave's words as well. Dave knows that I'm not a prescriptive person. Dave himself probably not that prescriptive either. But we did just tell you that you have to go and do everything on this board, every single thing. We are watching you. I'm kidding. We're not doing any of that. But you know what? I hope today was really helpful. I hope the session was helpful. I hope you're able to get some takeaways from it. My contact information is on my page on the Teachers Convention page. If people are interested in reaching out to me, I have no problem funneling and channeling questions to Dave. I won't offer Dave's contact information because I imagine he'll just get floods of information as well. But I'll leave that up to Dave. If he did ever want to offer that up,
Yeah, for sure.
feel
I love talking to coaches. So if anyone ever wants to have a conversation about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out. University of Lethbridge page is the best way to get a hold of me. All sorts of numbers, contacts, emails there. But feel free to reach out if you just want to. If you have a particular question about today, you want to go deeper into something, you just want to sort of bounce an idea off somebody. I mean, that's my favorite part of coaching. And these things, like I love this opportunity to talk about coaching at this level. So if you ever want to reach out, please do.
Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the entire convention. And I know I enjoyed talking about this. I love talking about these topics. I love that people want to get involved in coaching. I love the fact that people are teaching. I hope this year has been okay for people. Ultimately, it comes down to being well, being healthy. Make sure you're kind to yourself as well. Thank you very much to my partner today, Dave Wachnuck. Dave, always a pleasure to hang out with you and talk anything, but specifically these kinds of topics are a lot of fun. So
Yeah, I agree. A lot of fun.
thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody.